I was introduced into music through my mother, Marion Williams, who was a jazz singer. She worked with Johnny Dankworth, Oscar Rabin, Cedar Walton, Stan Getz, and was also the singer with the Ronnie Scott's House Quintet. Travelling artists used to sit in with the band. I watched her sing with Dizzy Gillespie, Al Jarreau, and Dexter Gordon. All these experiences of my mother inspired me to become a musician. At the age of 16, I picked up 6-string electric guitar. I played that for a week. I learned all the open chords. When I tried to progress on from there, I found it quite difficult. I had a light bulb moment. I thought, well, I'll cut the top 2 strings off. That'll leave me with 4. Turned it into a bass. I thought it's got to be easier. Unfortunately, it wasn't. And I've learned over the years that playing any instrument is really, really hard. My first professional instrument was a Hofner very thin semi-acoustic. At the time, I was working at Atlantic Records and I managed to bump into bass player Phil Chen. He was with Linda Lewis at the time, but he later went on to play with Rod Stewart and also on Jeff Beck's Blow by Blow. Phil and I became really good friends and he took an interest in that bass, so he bought it from me. With that money, I then went on and bought a 73 Fender P bass. And at the time I was taking lessons with Neil Murray, bass player with Whitesnake. He took that instrument from me and then brought it back to me a week later. And to my horror, the bass came back no frets. And he just said, look, it's a great sounding instrument, just learn to play it. I've owned many basses over the years, but I'd have to say my favourite has to be my 79 fretless Precision. I've been told it's one of 3 made for the European market. And Sting has one of those 3. It does sound amazing and it has got me quite a lot of work. Ian Hunter loved it. He'd already had Jacko playing with him on All American Boys, so he was aware of the sound of the instrument. So when he heard me play it, he said, yeah, we could use that. I've also played with Carl Verheyen on that instrument, Supertramp and session guitar player. Maggie Bell and Chris Farlowe toured with them on it. So yeah, it's had quite a life, that bass. I was really lucky enough to grow up in Camden in the 70s and 80s. At that time, culturally, it was a diverse place to be. Lots of different bands, musicians, venues, record shops. And also politically at the time, things were changing. So there was a lot going on in Camden. Around that time, I was heavily influenced by Jaco Pastorius and Weather Report and fusion in general. But in Camden at the time, punk was a big thing, and I really got into that just because of the ethos of the music and how it kind of spoke to the disenfranchised youth of the late 70s and 80s. So I went from listening to Weather Report to listening to the Sex Pistols, The Clash and X-Ray Specs. And also I never forgot the music that I'd listened to prior to that, which was funk and the reggae. From the funk period, I really liked Parliament and Funkadelic. And from reggae was Bob Marley and Studio One. My top 5 bass players will be Stanley Clarke, Paul Jackson, Larry Graham, Marcus Miller and Jaco Pastorius. But having said that, there's so many other musicians that have inspired me or influenced me to a degree that it would be impossible to name them all. Ironically, my big break came from a jam session in a squat in North London. And back in the 70s and 80s, there were lots of vacant properties. Musicians would take over, they would live in them, and they would rehearse or set up jam sessions in them. The first one I ever went to, I met Steve Hillage from the Gong Posse. I later joined Steve's band, and this was the beginning of my musical career. Some of the artists I went on to play for were Paul Weller, James Taylor Quartet, Galliano, Ian Hunter, Paul Gilbert, and Omar. Some of the highlights include playing on Top of the Pops with London Beat, headlining Glastonbury with the Steve Hillage Band. But the moment I'm most proud of is the tour with Paul Weller, particularly the live recording with the BBC. The advice I give to any musicians wanting to work at a pro level would be to master your instrument, Diversify your skills and leave your ego at home.